This weekend's video is going to discuss Chapter 1.3, Properties of Numbers. I'm going to show you part of the book and describe it to you. Feel free to pause the video if you feel like you need to write some of this down. I'm going to work mostly out of the examples column. The first property, the reflexive property, discusses how the left side and the right side of the equal sign are identical. So for example, 8 equals 8. Or 7 times 2 equals 7 times 2. I'm intentionally going to pick different numbers than the ones in the book. The symmetric property talks about how you can move something from the left side to the right side and then vice versa without changing the fact that they're equal. So for example, 3 plus 4 equals 7, which means 7 equals 3 plus 4. The transitive property is much more confusing in words than it probably is in an example. And it's a concept that most people typically understand at this point. It says that if 3 plus 4 equals 5 plus 2, and 3 plus 4 equals 7, then 5 plus 2 must also equal 7. The substitution property, one we use often in algebra, says that if x equals 7, then 3x is the same as 3 times 7. And then on the bottom of the page, the addition properties, the additive identity property basically says that if you add 0 to any number, it doesn't change its value. So for example, 5 plus 0 equals 5. And the additive inverse says that if you add the opposite or subtract a number from itself, it will equal 0. So for example, 2 plus negative 2 or 2 minus 2 equals 0. The three multiplicative properties I want to discuss. The multiplicative identity basically says if you multiply any number times 1, it doesn't change its value. So for example, 8 times 1 equals 8. The multiplicative property of 0 states that if you multiply a number by 0, it will equal 0. So 3 times 0 equals 0. And the multiplicative inverse says that if you take a fraction and you flip it, and you multiply these two fractions together, they will equal 1. So 2/3 times 3 over 2 equals 6 over 6, or 1. All right, let's practice using some of these. So what we're going to do is we're going to solve this problem, and we're going to state the property that we're using. So in this first problem, I'm going to use order of operations to help me solve it, and I'm going to do the parentheses first. So this becomes 7 times 1 minus 1 plus 5 times 1/5. To get this, I used substitution. 7, I'm going to do multiplication next. I got two multiplication problems, this one and this one. 7 times 1 equals 7. I know this because I used the multiplicative identity property, which says if you multiply a number times 1, it holds its value, minus 1 plus 5 times 1/5, and if you think of 5 as 5 over 1, this basically is a fraction that is inverted, so this is the multiplicative inverse property, and it tells me that that is 1. You'll notice that I'm abbreviating, which you're allowed to do. Now I'm just going to use substitution. 7 minus 1 is 6 plus 1. That was substitution. And using substitution again, 6 plus 1 equals 7. All right, now you try one. Please pause the video at this time to practice this problem. All right, the first thing you want to do is solve inside of the parentheses. 15 divided by 3 is 5. That is substitution. Five minus 5 is 0. That is the additive inverse property. Now I'm going to do multiplication, and I got two multiplication problems. 7 times 1/7 is 1. The multiplicative inverse property. 6 times 0 is the multiplicative property of 0. That is 0. I should end up with 1 using substitution to get this final answer. All right, there are 2 more properties that we need to discuss. These we use all the time in algebra. The first one is the commutative property. It's on the top of the page. And the commutative property, if you think of the word commute, just means that things can move around without changing value. Now keep in mind this only works with addition and multiplication. Also, the associative property says that while I won't change the order, what I'm going to do is group numbers using parentheses, and I'm allowed to group numbers however I want as long as it is addition or multiplication. All right, let's practice a couple of these. Sorry, I put them all the way over there. 2.5 times 4 times 10. Now there are a bunch of different ways you could solve it, and assuming for a second that I don't want to just go across, what I'm going to do is use the commutative property to make this problem a little bit easier for myself, and that means I'm going to go 2.5 times 10 times 4. So the commutative property allowed me to switch the order of these 2 numbers. Now, using the associative property, I'm going to multiply these 2 numbers first, and then multiply them by 4. And since I know a trick with multiplying by 10 that I can move the decimal over 1, this will become 25 times 4. And 25 times 4 is 100. All right, you try one. Please pause the video at this time to practice this problem. Well, there are a lot of ways that you could solve this. One might be to go 5 times 2 times 7 times 4. And then I'm going to group these 2 and group these 2, and this becomes 10, and this becomes 28. Now I know that 10 times 28 is 280. All right, thank you for watching this video. Enjoy the rest of your weekend.